Hello, my name is Jordan Berg, and I'm the Telehealth Technology Assessment Specialist at the Telehealth Technology Assessment Center. TTAC often receives questions from organizations and individuals about how to engage with telehealth technology vendors. This can be a daunting subject, especially if you've not previously worked with technology providers. TTAC has recorded a series of interviews with a variety of telehealth technology vendors in which we asked about the types of questions they commonly ask their customers, the kinds of questions their customers commonly ask them, and some common challenges healthcare organizations face when selecting telehealth technologies. Finally, we asked them to comment on how the COVID-19 crisis has changed the telemedicine market space. In this video, we've compiled a few key responses to those questions that may help to demystify the vendor-customer relationship. We hope you find this information useful in your telemedicine technology journey. What are some common questions you ask potential customers who are looking to set up or expand their telemedicine programs?
When we engage with new customers, the questions that we routinely ask begin with, and this sounds very simplistic, but it begins with, what is the problem that they're actually trying to solve? You'll be surprised at how often folks kind of jump over that to directly to the point of, hey, I need to stand up a telehealth program and let me go and look for technology. It should be the business challenge is driving the program, the governance, and then ultimately the technology. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing we like to do is get an understanding of what current state looks like within the organization. Where are they on the maturity curve for telehealth? Are they just starting out? Do they have some programs in place? Are they, have they been practicing for a while and are looking for ways to expand and become more efficient? So that becomes the next point of conversation. Immediately after that, we start getting into, what the immediate challenges are for, telehealth that they're looking to address. What are the service lines? What is the, specific care modalities, if you will, and such. When we take a look at what is the technology environment that they're dealing with, the EHR, their PAC systems, those types of things that are really important parts of the overall ecosystem, the providers are going to need to gain access to the information in those systems and such, and we need to understand that in the context of the workflows that they're going to look to support. Some of the other things that we like to take a look at is the organizational structure around telehealth, because frequently, like I said, folks will jump directly into the technology piece, and it's really the governance that ends up becoming the critical driving factor. The technology is just an enabler, right? And I know I'm representing technology, so I probably shouldn't go to that level. But the truth is, if you don't have the right governance, the right corporate structure, and the right support, you won't have a successful program, no matter how good the technology is that you deploy. So we explore that a little bit and make sure that we've got the right foundation in place to build upon, if you will. And then we get into some of the more details around the project itself, right? What does the ideal solution look like to support the project? What is the initial size of the project? What are the timing constraints, built around that? How is it being funded, and what does the budget look like to support it? Because all of those things help the vendor as a partner craft a solution that meets that particular health system's unique.
I always start off with, what are they trying to accomplish? It's important to know the scale and scope of what they're trying to achieve, how many participants they're going to be looking to work with, even any financials that they may have if known. I always ask, what does success look like for them? What's going to be the reach of the project? How are you going to measure improvement in care? Things like that. So those are some of the questions that I always ask. Are the goals the same for all the stakeholders? For instance, there's usually many people involved and many organizations involved in these decisions. What are the different viewpoints and how are they all aligned?
We really want to make sure that we're able to facilitate and help our customers so that they can help the patients that they're working with. We want to make sure that we understand what they're doing, so that if there's something they're forgetting to do or something that's important in that particular type of telehealth encounter, that we can work with them, partner with them, and understand what their requirements are. I think, looking back at telehealth for the last 18 years, you pretty much had one particular thing, a smaller group of people pursuing in the remote and rural areas. And we were looking at things like telestroke, psychiatry, things that were coming in a volume that's kind of smaller. And that right now, the way things have changed, there's really been this explosion, and there's so many different things that might be valuable to the healthcare systems that we can help them with. If you think about working with Triton, you're going to think about things like, what are the challenges you're facing? What is the pain point you're trying to alleviate? And do you have any particular use cases in mind? Or maybe you're just trying to deal with the fact that, COVID means that you can no longer triage the way you used to. Or the big one that comes to mind there is the fact that you're trying to protect the providers so that they aren't exposed and they're not using up their protective equipment. So if you talk with somebody now, they're going to be concerned about things like, how do I do virtual rounding? Working with the other side of it for the skilled nursing facilities and the homes, where we've all seen, either people we love or know in a situation where you can no longer communicate with them because they've closed down the skilled nursing facility. So, we're anticipating and have been supporting people that are trying to do things like virtual visiting. So it's really important, I think. We want to be able to, and as a practitioner personally, I want to be able to impact the health and well-being of as many people as I possibly can. And if we're able to understand what the customer that comes to us is trying to do, we can try to help them do that in the best possible way, and make sure that there's anything else that we might know about that we can share with them, and start to form that partnership so that we know that they're successful, and their successful means we know more people are being taken care of, and hopefully not being exposed to COVID when it's not necessary.
What are questions that customers commonly ask you?
I think the first, besides, cost, everybody wants, that's their first question off the bat. The other big piece of it, and the ones that certainly understand it a little bit more, they don't want to just get a product to fit a need and check a box. They want to understand a little bit more. But there still are people at the beginning stage, and they just want to know, okay, is this going to give me the same quality of care as an in-person experience, and how do we validate that? And certainly a lot of that comes down to the technology that we use and the quality of the images and the way it's shared. And so going through that process with them, their question about quality of care, and if it's the same as in person, and how they can mimic that. The other thing they want to know is if it's going to help them increase revenue. So how can they use this to increase their own revenue, not just patient care. Of course, that's a big part of it, and quality of care, but also their revenue. And then the big thing is integration with what they have. HL7 integration, FHIR, what APIs we have. There's a lot of different questions around the technology itself and how it will speak to what they have.
Not surprisingly, one of the first questions out of everybody's mouth is, what's it going to cost me? Everybody wants to get an idea of what it costs. And unfortunately, until you kind of define what it is that you need, there's no way to really put cost around that, right? The other question that immediately rolls off of everybody's tongue is whether or not the solution will integrate with the EHR. And that's a very relevant, very important question for them to be asking, because if you think about it, the challenges that folks have had in terms of really growing and expanding telehealth have revolved around the fact that telehealth was always this separate, standalone type of an entity, right? That was kind of parsed out from the rest of the way the organization delivered care. And if the rest of the organization is delivering care based on information out of the EHR and initiating workflow from there and such, and all of a sudden you have a modality that's completely separate from that, that poses challenges in terms of getting people to adopt and to be able to use effectively. There's always questions around, will they be able to bill for whatever the use case is that they're going after, right? They have the sense that they want to participate in telehealth, but they're really not sure about the business case behind it. So they frequently look to us as a consultant to kind of help them understand, how does the business case shake out and look like for a given use case. Then they'll also want to know, project specific details, because often you're working with the folks who are, on the line to deliver. So they want to know about how long does it take to get the system operational once they make a decision and such. And of course, some of the things around data privacy and security. They want to know how you align with their security protocols, saying, will you execute a BAA, those types of things.
Are there any questions that you wish customers asked you at the start of a collaboration?
One of the things that I think would be really helpful if people ask right up front is, what do your existing customers think about your solution and service, right? And what were the problems that you were able to solve for them? Because that would give them an opportunity right up front to get an understanding of how the technology is applicable, as opposed to it being a rote discussion about technology, right? And features and bells and whistles and that sort of thing. Understanding the applicability and how the healthcare business problems are solved through the technology, I think would be a really useful way to begin the conversation and kind of go from there. After that, conversation around how our solution is differentiated from those that others provide, and even from the perspective of the different tiers of solution providers, right? And this is something that's come out more recently in some conversations that I've had with customers, where there was an epiphany as we were talking. They were putting out an RFP to a very broad set of solution providers and hadn't realized up front that there are different stratums of solution providers, right? Where you've got a base layer that are component providers, right? The traditional video conferencing vendors, for example. They provide a really important component to telehealth that sometimes can be paired up with existing EHR and provide a great solution for somebody's specific needs and use case. And then in other cases, they're going to need something that goes beyond what just the video conferencing provides, and they end up needing special workflows that they can't get out of the EHR, and they need some additional tools to bring that together and make the remote care delivery possible. And that takes you to a level where you've got technology enablement platforms, right? And that's kind of where VitalNet sits today. And then, perhaps another tier above that is those who actually provide clinical services as well to fill those care gaps and that sort of thing. And understanding that strata and what segment of solution providers you should be looking at would be really helpful for people to not waste their time on, vetting vendors that really don't have the solution that's right for the problem that they're looking to solve. The other side to that too is everybody always feels, it's taboo to talk about, money and sometimes hesitant to talk about budget and such. But if you were upfront with your vendor in terms of what, budget looks like, you'd be amazed at how the vendor is able to get creative to make things happen for you within the budget that you have to work with. And there's lots of examples that we have over time of doing that, where somebody describes what they're looking to do, and it may seem one solution set is appropriate, but if the budget is not anywhere near what it takes to do that, there are other ways to do it on a skinnier basis that may end up hitting that core, business objective, may not have all the bells and whistles, and may not have some of the upside potential that you would have with, the higher end solution. But you can still solve the core problem that you're looking to solve and do it within the means that you have to do it.
What does deployment of the product look like? How fast is it to turn this thing on? If I decide to do no customization, we would love to hear that. Because there's a big difference between that and a full-blown EHR integration. To your point about how long is it going to take to use it if you're waiting for EHR integration to happen. So we'd love to hear providers or customers talk about that. Hey, how long does it take me to turn it on and go? And how much training is required? A customer that's looking for a low amount of training, easy to use system, they are probably going to be more successful in their deployment long-term, rather than a system that's complex, maybe has a lot of bells and whistles, but is a long ramp and the patients get tired of using it. The provider get tired of using it. So you don't want that. And one of the most important, I wish a lot of customers would do this, ask for the metric. And the metric is what is cost per patient and what is cost per provider? What is my ROI? Ask the vendor to tell you what that ROI looks like. I've got 10,000 patients. I have 4 providers, 5 providers. What does that look like per provider, per patient?
What information can a customer have prepared or documented prior to vendor discussion to help move the process forward?
What I recommend most customers do is go into a phased approach to this challenge of selecting a vendor. And I break it out into 3 phases. I call it the request for information phase. Here is where customers are, they're actively thinking about it, they're gathering information, they're talking to the TTRC, they're talking to MATRC, they're trying to gather information, they're going online, they're researching stuff. Well, this is the time to develop a list of general questions or specific questions about the technology or the solution that you may be looking for. You may not necessarily have a requirement, but you have general areas that you want to probe the market on, okay? So develop that list and pick out about 5 vendors is what I recommend is ideal to start with. Don't go less than 5 at this stage. And send that questionnaire out to them and then schedule a meeting. Then hear their pitches, listen to the responses, take that information, internalize it within your organization, and then step into what I call the request for quote phase. At this stage, you're going to take that information you gathered in the RFI phase, the request for information phase, mold it into requirements, hard requirements, but very importantly, coupled with your, as a consumer or as a customer, your criteria. So hard criteria against real requirements, hard requirements. Have a score set up for this so that you as an organization, once you pull these vendors back in, you listen to their hard requirements responses, you rate those responses based on your criteria. You don't share the criteria with them. And that should be hopefully your selected vendor, one of those 3. They should pop out of the score.
Are there any common mistakes you see customers make as they look at new or expanded telemedicine technology?
Sometimes they don't think, we talk back not thinking big enough picture, but I think sometimes they think it's a checkbox. They're like, okay, we got to have telehealth. Now it's, again, with COVID and the current situation, it's no longer a checkbox. It's definitely needed, but it still is. I still think people like, well, we have to do this, and they're checking it off the list, and they don't really understand the why and why they're doing it, and making sure it's going to actually give the business value, not just react to what patients need, but the business as a whole, long term. And that's our job, is to try to explain that to them, convince them, and understand it. But the other common mistake, I guess, would be is if they don't. There's a lot of particularly smaller healthcare organizations that may not have the IT resources or the IT support behind this, and that can be a huge challenge. So we've got a champion user, we've got a clinical professional that just thinks telemedicine is the best thing in the world, and they want to take care of their patients, but the IT person doesn't really. They look at it as a piece of hardware, right? Or software, and they're just gonna install it, set it up, and they don't understand even why the company's using it or the organization's using it, and they don't have that bigger picture. So I think you don't need IT every little step of the way. I mean, the whole point is to have a solution that IT doesn't have to constantly be in the middle of, but they still have to manage it. They still have to be involved. It's technology. You can't. So I think we see a lot of mistakes with customers, let's say a nurse or a doctor that contacts us and moves forward with it, and then the IT person's like an afterthought, and they're not part of it, and then they feel left out. I mean, so that's a common mistake. I think it's getting better. It used to be on the reverse. We used to have IT people involved and not the clinical, and now I feel like it's actually switched. It's really interesting how it's kind of switched. And then the other piece, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, was involved administration, right? So if you don't have everybody involved, then it may take off right away, but that it might fail. And particularly with grants, we have a lot of grant-based customers. They buy the equipment, they have the grant, and it's running out, they got to spend the money, and they're really invested in the idea, and they've got their plan, but then when it comes time to launch it, that excitement, that urgency is gone. And so it goes in a closet, and people forget why they got it and how to use it. And so that's another mistake. I don't know if that's more of individual, organization mistake, but that we do see that sometimes as well.
So just going back to our process, so the requirements are not firm or they're too general. That's a big problem usually. They're just too general to be able to say, yeah, we could meet it, but has the customer, sometimes we educate the customer, say, this requirement is so general, I don't know if you could find another vendor that could. They'll probably tell you they'll meet it, but it may not work for you because it's too wide. So narrow it down. If you want to be able to see glucometer readings directly, automatically from the patient, then say that you need that automatically gathered. If you want to do remote patient monitoring, do it automatically, ask for it. If you don't need it, then you can say either automatic or manual, right? But be as specific as possible. That's where we see sometimes, there's a disconnect. The requirements aren't pinned down as we would hope that they would be. And then we have to work with the customer to get them pinned down so that we can respond to it. One of the things, I'll go back to the process, that their selection team needs to be well-defined and represent, I think you mentioned this earlier, well-defined and represents all the key stakeholders that have a say in that system.
How I would categorize the telemedicine solutions out there, you would have video conferencing tools, right? Zoom, what we're on right now, there's video, there's other video conferencing solutions. You'd have telemedicine applications that you can use, perhaps even white labeling it for your practice and making it your own. You have telemedicine platforms that you could either utilize their platform, that ecosystem, or even offset or use their staff to cover for it. There's all types of telemedicine solutions out there. Then there's things like Simple Visit, where we're a telemedicine service. We're not the video conferencing tool. We're not the application or the platform. We're a service. So knowing those categories of vendor selection is going to be a really, really important thing. And is a common mistake is that they just don't know. They'll go for the low-hanging fruit because, again, they're equating telemedicine with technology. They're like, oh, we use Zoom, so we're just going to use Zoom for all the above. Not saying Zoom's bad and not even a solution, but just like we discussed, it may not be the best solution based on your use case, based on your stakeholders, based on your workflow. Then you look at the technology. And so not having that knowledge seems to be a missing piece when medical groups are looking for telemedicine services.
One of the things that's out there, especially at this time where people are really moving forward dramatically with virtual care deployments, is there's a great opportunity for efficiency improvement among the different departments in the hospital if they communicated. Do I really need a second set of carts? Or if I have a video unit in the space and I understand the utilization of it and I'm not going to impact its core mission, why don't I leverage it and use it for something else? So that takes departmental communication, right? Sometimes it takes departmental budget collaboration where one department's going to buy it for this. And, as salespeople, we're trying to educate and say, you're going to buy it for this, but we want you to know you could use it for these three other things, such as telesitting, video interpreting, or health record point of care. So those are some of, I wouldn't call them mistakes, but I would say missed opportunities, Jordan, that are really coming about, and they're available now to sort of cut down, but actually get more out of your investments as an institution.
So I think one of the common mistakes, outside of just focusing only on price, is that often I find organizations overestimate their own internal capabilities. It's not that the staff aren't highly capable. They often can do just wondrous things. It's that time is a finite quantity, and as you prioritize projects and you start getting work done, all of a sudden a simple interface that could have taken only 2 days now takes 6 months. And it puts the project in crisis. I think being realistic about what you're able to do and how much time you have to do it is important on the customer side. Another common mistake I see that I probably would want to make sure that we address, and that is making sure you have the right stakeholders in the decision group as you move forward. I find that it's invaluable to have people with the experience and knowledge of what's currently happening in the clinic to help make this process smooth. They understand the elements of the exam or the screening process, and they understand that just taking 1 more minute per patient is going to be adding 20 to 30 more minutes of work at the end of a busy workday. You have to be thinking of what the actual clinical workflow is right now, and how are these changes going to upset or be integrated into those steps, those workflow processes.
How has the COVID-19 pandemic changed the telemedicine market space?
I think generally COVID-19 has accelerated telehealth adoption by 5 years. Of course, now, because of the acuteness of the problem, the changes have meant that there's some stopgap measures being used to do telehealth visits. But I've heard providers say, oh, I'm using FaceTime. And I have to educate them and say, look, I understand why you're doing it. I know it looks like it's okay now. The problem is your liability doesn't go away, even though you're permitted to use it. So whatever you adopt, make sure that even though you're adopting it in a time of great acute problem, but adopt it and make sure that it kind of fits into your long-term game plan. And don't expose yourself unnecessarily to liability, because once it all calms down, the liability will come back.
Yeah, I would just add that COVID has brought the concept of hands-free work like forward. And that involves everything from before you hit the door of the institution. Hands-free patient registration, hands-free thermal imaging, thermal recognition of your temperature, hands-free facial recognition at the door without a person within a couple feet of you or having to stand over a counter talking like the normal check-in. Those are use cases that are accelerating very rapidly in our world. And then we're combining those use cases again with people are recognizing it. There's smart people who have built and deployed telehealth in the past that have that expertise. They're combining some of the things that I said onto multi-purpose vehicles. So if you have a camera, a tablet, or a camera and an all-in-one PC, and you're doing patient check-in, and there's a question, the potential to beam someone in with expertise and do the follow-up right there before the person gets into the core of the building, that's real now, and that's multi-purpose. That's video conferencing combined with thermal imaging. Those are the things that are coming about by need, and it's really exciting to see those things emerge so quickly, and we're excited to support all the vendors and institutions that want to do those things and innovate, because honestly we have to. There's not enough people and there's too many sick people. So we want to help as vendors. We want to help the caregivers, help the patients as much as the institutions do, and we're getting a chance to do it in new ways, which is exciting in the middle of a terrible situation. If we could do something better for the caregivers, that's what we want to do.
Another aspect of that is around simplicity, right? So you could come up with this amazing solution, but if it is something that's going to require either a lot of setup time, or it's going to require, so many functions and things that you're going to need 6 months to prepare how they utilize and use all that stuff, that's going to take a different, you're going to evaluate that differently in a COVID situation versus I want to stand up telestroke next year, or I'm looking to do telederm, so the simplicity of getting the answer in place. And then if you've got someone in the field that's in that temporary tent that's never done video before in their life, then the simplicity of how that rounding solution will work is going to mean whether they can use it or not, right? So you can have something really fancy and actually cost a lot more money and be really amazing, but if they can't use it in the field quickly. So that buying criteria, that what is most important becomes simplicity or timeliness. And those would change the answers of what you want to do versus, something that's going to, perhaps go into the OR in a long-term project plan kind of thing.
Pre-COVID, right, we had a challenge of adoption. So oftentimes it would be, we want to do virtual care. Our patients just aren't really using what we have right now. Or we would hear about clinicians were sort of pushing back, they're not ready. we're not sure. COVID sort of forced everybody everybody had to do it. We as patients, we had to use virtual care on the patient side. Clinicians were sort of forced into doing it if they wanted to provide care. So a lot of the challenges that I saw in the past was, we want to do virtual care. Everybody's bought in, but our doctors are just not ready. And so the doctors were kind of not ready and reimbursement wasn't quite there. And so I think COVID really changed the landscape where folks had this sort of 5-year plan of where it would be, and that just really got shortened down to a few months. So patients were suddenly using it at high rates, clinicians were now using it at high rates, and I think people are finally realizing the quality and the comfort on both sides of how easy this is to use and the impact that it can make. But one of the biggest things that I've seen is that a lot of groups were trying to figure out, how do we solve for the problem that our clinicians are not ready to do this? They're pushing back, they don't want to do this. And I think that that has changed, and it's helped expedite a lot of decisions, because it's sort of like, hey, our doctors are using it. COVID happened. And I think they're trying to also capitalize on the momentum and excitement versus things maybe slowing down over time. And now our doctors are kind of not sure. And so I think that that's something that's huge, that's changed. I have seen, obviously we have a lot of demand. Everybody in virtual care does what we do as well with our device, but we have seen organizations that were not at all doing virtual care for a variety of reasons. Suddenly now they are ready to go enterprise-wide and move much quicker, which I think is great for patients out there that live in a specific market, that you want it, but you can't get it. And so I think it's really going to change the landscape, because the patients are using it, the clinicians are using it, reimbursement has changed to some extent, and everybody else that was sort of moving really slow has moved a lot faster. And so, yeah, one of the biggest challenges we saw was, hey, we don't have doctors that want to do this, and we want to offer this, but our doctors aren't ready. And so now what we've seen is it's not just primary care and urgent care doctors that are brought in, but specialists have now sort of jumped in and doing all of these sort of specialty consults that they weren't doing before. So I think it's unfortunate what happened, but it's really great for healthcare as a whole, and especially virtual care. The timing right now, this has pushed us to be at the forefront of healthcare, and it'll just continue to grow. These are challenging times, but it's exciting as well, especially if you're in this space. A lot more spotlight is on virtual care, and I think it's also a challenge, I think, for buyers, because now there's more and more companies that are sort of propping up, and now you have even more to look at. But it's also good because it creates competition, and it really allows you to look at other solutions. And yeah, I think the challenges that we saw in the past of when I would ask them, like, what is your challenge in getting virtual care launched? It's sort of now gone down a lot. Now it's like, no, our doctors are bought in, our leadership sees that this is important, we're ready to go.
On the one side, the genie's out of the bottle, right? Telehealth is now a way of life across the globe. People understand the value in it, the necessity in it in many cases. And that's great for all of us because we know the power of a well-built telehealth program and what that can mean in terms of access to care and efficiency and care delivery and such. The flip side to that is it was the Wild West, right? Everybody just started doing whatever they could in order to fill the gap, and using all kinds of different tools that are probably outside the realm of what an organization that actually has to maintain and build a program with any consistency would want to do. And now the challenge for the industry at large is to take a step back and say, okay, how do we capture the goodness of the excitement and energy around the need for telehealth, and now do this in a programmatic fashion that is consistent with high quality care delivery that we're used to doing when we deliver in person and such. So I think that that's a key piece of what's come out of COVID. I think there is a realization as we get to the other side of this that telehealth is way more than just video conferencing, that workflow matters, that access to information matters, and making that as efficient and simple for the providers as possible is how you end up deriving the real value and benefit in what telehealth has to offer. I think that one other thing that folks should consider as they think about telehealth programs and whatnot is kind of where the world had started, and kind of what, back to your point on COVID-19 has kind of helped usher along is this concept of point solutions for telehealth, right? The way the world used to be is that if I wanted to go ahead and deliver remote patient monitoring services for my chronically ill population, I would go out and I would buy a telehealth stack that supported remote patient monitoring. And I would capture all this great data about my patients and be able to care for them while they were at home, leveraging this data. And that was fantastic until my patient had an episode that brought them into the emergency room or to an urgent care center. At which point, the care team that got access to them there had no access to this information that's out inside of the home monitoring data and such. And they used a different technology stack in order to be able to gain access to a specialist or whatever the case may be. As healthcare systems look to implement telehealth as an integrated form of care delivery, that can't be the case. You can't continue to proliferate these silos of patient data and these one-off solutions that end up making it very difficult to have longitudinal continuity for these patients as they traverse the telehealth care continuum. So, thinking about it more from a platform-wide perspective becomes really important, so that you can have that consistency, stand up additional use cases as you go, instead of having to reinvent every time you have a new service line that needs telehealth capability.
I want to thank the vendors who contributed their feedback to this discussion. In closing, we'd like to leave you with a few key considerations you may want to think about when you choose technologies and select a vendor. First, it's important to have a well-defined use case for the technology you plan to support, including what needs you're trying to meet, what costs you can expect to incur, and a clear understanding of what success will look like for your program. 2, it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with the technology and the vendor market space that supports the use case you are pursuing. A little knowledge can go a long ways. 3, make sure you get support from all relevant stakeholders in your organization, including clinical, administrative, and information technology. 4, as you plan your telemedicine strategy, be sure to consider how these solutions will be used in the future. Will the technologies you choose today meet your needs 6 months from now, a year from now, or even 5 years into the future? We very much hope these conversations have been valuable to you and help you navigate your technology and vendor selection process.